Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Chiwoniso Kaitano, Executive Director of MacDowell, an artist residency in New York established in 1907, so over 100 years ago, and now one of the most prestigious artist residencies worldwide. I speak to Chiwoniso about her career path and what led her to her position as executive director of the residency. We delve into how the residency runs, and we chat about its core mission within the art ecosystem. I ask her about her responsibilities within her role, as well as how she feels about the current political climate in the United States, especially while spearheading a company that has seen over 100 years of change. I'm excited to be releasing this podcast to coincide with their Medal Day celebration, taking place on June 29th, where this year they are honoring Chilean-born visual artist, architect, and filmmaker Alfredo Jar with the 65th Edward MacDowell Medal. Thank you, Chiwoniso, for coming on the podcast and welcoming me to the MacDowell office in Chelsea while I was in New York. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Chiwoniso.
Thank you.
To start us off, I would love for you to tell listeners about your background. Can you tell me more about how you developed your career? What did you study and what experiences did you gain before stepping into the role of executive director at MacDowell 2 years ago?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think there is a long and short answer to that question. I'm one of these people who have not had a linear career, but I have always sort of known what I wanted to do. My professional life has been quite bifurcated. My academic credentialing is in law. I actually studied human rights law at the London School of Economics, and I continued those studies at Columbia University at the School for International Affairs, specializing in, humanitarian law, the laws of war, genocide. So that's my background. And I always thought that I would, end up trying war criminals at The Hague, working maybe in, South Sudan for an aid agency. And that's the life I had imagined for myself. After a very brief stint at Human Rights Watch here in New York, I just started feeling something different. I'd always had an interest in the arts. I was very vested in the nonprofit world. But before that part of my story came into being, I did do a 10-year stint in IT and software. This is right during the dot-com boom of the early 2000s. But this feeling that I was in the wrong job never really left me. And that's when I really started thinking, this is probably about 15 years ago, about my interest in art, how I had sort of, in my personal life, always supported creativity and artists, how I had practiced it for myself, and really started thinking about what that looks like as a profession. After my son was born, this sort of thought process became a lot more intentional. And I ended up going into nonprofit administration because of my legal background in human rights law. My first job as a nonprofit director was working for a poverty alleviation project in Bedford-Stuyvesant, a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And I did that for 4 years. And then the opportunity to run a youth-focused cultural arts academy opened up. And I took that that role, stayed there for a couple of years, and then segued into another sort of arts education experience working with a global NGO called Girl Be Heard. Stayed with them sort of during the pandemic. And then, started getting that feeling again that I just needed to be maybe a little closer to what my passion, my core interests were, which was firmly having my feet in the arts world and not the arts adjacent world, which is the world of arts education. And the MacDowell opportunity came up just as I was looking. I had actually initiated a couple of conversations to be CEO of a new museum that was going to open up. And very quickly realized that I did not have an art history background. Running a museum is probably not in my future. But there are these wonderful things called art support organizations. And there's this incredible institution called MacDowell. And they were having a leadership transition. And I spoke to the recruiters. And after a few back and forth conversations, it just felt like the right thing for me at the right time. And I've been here for 2 years at this point.
Okay, that's wonderful. And it segues really perfectly into my next question, which is, can you tell me more about MacDowell and its structure? What is it? How does it function within the art ecosystem in terms of its organizational model and mission?
Yes, I'm always surprised when I have to explain what an artist residency is, because for those of us in the world, there's an assumption that everybody knows about this amazing part of the arts ecosystem. MacDowell is 118 years old. It is America's oldest artist residency and certainly one of its most preeminent. And what artist residencies are is really essential and core parts of the arts infrastructure. It's where creativity begins. What we do if you're a creative person or an artist is we give you the freedom to create, time and space and community to come to a private and secluded place where you can work on your craft or your practice. At MacDowell, we support all the disciplines, everything from writing and architecture, filmmaking, music composition. We welcome interdisciplinary artists as well. There's pretty much no creative or artistic field that we haven't welcomed a fellow in. So we're pretty broad in that way. The MacDowell Fellowship experience is you're allowed 2 to 6 weeks on our campus. Our campus is 500 acres in the New Hampshire woods. It is a very rural area. We've got 44 buildings on campus, and out of those 44, 31 of them are private artist studios. And it is designed so that when you're in your private studio somewhere on our land, you will not see another studio within eyesight. It's pretty secluded. It's a very, very special experience. In your residency, during your residency, all your meals will be provided. We provide free breakfast, lunch, and a community meal dinner. All your needs are taken care of. Besides the experience being free, we do have needs-based support for artists that need that support to take time away from their real lives, to just come and work on something that they've wanted to work on or a project that they have on the boil. For the application process, while we do encourage you to put your best foot forward and send in a really strong portfolio, once you get accepted for a fellowship, there's no expectation at all that you work on that particular project. You can spend your entire 6 weeks getting some rest and recuperation and not creating anything that might diminish your personal experience as an artist somewhat. But we as an organization do not put any pressure at all on your creativity. What we are there to sort of foment and facilitate is how to help you unlock your creative process and whatever it is you need. We know that the formula is nature. We provide that in spades. The campus is a place of extraordinary peace and beauty. We know that a supportive community helps. And we certainly embody that with our staff. I call them our caretakers on campus, and the community we build of other fellows who are on campus at the same time. And we really know that the freedom to really explore is something that you will not get if you are in your day-to-day life. You've got the distractions of maybe professional obligations, familial obligations, and other things going on. So the whole MacDowell experience and maybe the whole artist residency experience, is this idea that you can enter this portal of seclusion, and all of these ingredients that we give you will really help you tap into something that will help you unlock your creativity. That's really what an artist residency is.
Wow. I think that sounds heavenly. And also, I love that you say that you don't put pressure on the artists to actually, or I would say the residents, the creatives, to actually create anything while they're there. So hearing that is actually really, it's really encouraging, I think, that there are organizations out there that exist that provide that sort of support for creative practitioners, whatever their practice may look like.
It's a privilege to be able to do this job and to be able to support artists in the way that I do. The question of access is a real one. And, as a person on the inside, I am very aware that while MacDowell does provide sort of this free experience, time isn't free. There is a cost to sort of going off into the woods for 6 weeks, whatever that personal and professional cost is. And even though the experience we give you will not cost you anything, and we do try and support you as much as we're able through the funds we raise with needs-based financial support, still some people cannot come. And this has become sort of a conversation in the artist residency community about what does it really look like to give the folks who cannot come for whatever reason the ability to take advantage of this really quite unique and privileged experience.
Yeah. And thinking about your role as executive director, what are some of your responsibilities? What does your day-to-day look like in your job?
Oh my gosh, $1 million question. What does my day-to-day not look like in my job? I am a fundraiser. I'm the fundraiser in chief. I talk, quite highly of our free experience. It costs someone somewhere. And these are our amazing individual and institutional and corporate donors who are on this journey with us and are partners with us in artist support. And that is a huge part of my job, is raising the money to make sure this big machine runs. I am a strategist. The role of any executive director or any CEO is really to set the pace and the tempo for the vision for that organization. Where is this ship going? Let's avoid the icebergs. There's the horizon. There's the prize. That is, sort of the other big part of my job. But I'm also a very hands-on manager, and I'm deeply involved in the day-to-day. MacDowell is a big operation. I mentioned we've got 44 buildings on campus. We've got several dozen staff in 2 locations. We've got our New York galleries in the Chelsea Arts District. We have our campus in Peterborough, New Hampshire. We also, in the last couple of years, have launched national and soon-to-be international public programming, where we are connecting to partners and our fellows out in the field, and really talking about our sector and talking about the power of art in building community. And that is a dialogue that we're having at art fairs and book festivals and conferences and panels. And that's actually, outside of the day-to-day, being one of the most rewarding parts of my job, is traveling the United States and traveling internationally and connecting to all kinds of arts communities and seeing where we can support each other, amplify, and plug in. Did I mention I'm also a banker, a budgeter, a therapist, a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a den mother, to use a very old-fashioned and gendered phrase. But this is the role of a hands-on executive director or CEO. I kind of, I've got a lot of wonderful arts administrator, executive director colleagues, and we all agree on one thing, which is every job we've ever done in our past contribute to the success of the job we're currently in. And by that, I mean, I'm a person who's, non-linear career. I've done every job. I've been a bartender on a college campus. I was investment banker for a very brief stint, so brief, it doesn't even show up on my resume. That's how brief it was. I've been sort of a legal advocate. I've worked as a receptionist, all kinds of things. And every job experience I have had has contributes to the job I do today, because being an ED really is about being the world's best generalist.
I find that really interesting because that is actually something that I like to ask a lot of people as well, is like, how have your past experiences influenced what you do today? And especially being in a position that carries that much responsibility, I think, of course, you'd have to bring in your past experiences in order to be able to make the decisions, because all of these past experiences that you've had define how you approach the strategy that you're bringing into MacDowell today. You know, when we talk about, even as a freelancer, when I talk about consulting or, giving my expertise to something, and it takes me 1 hour of my time to, for example, sit on a panel or give someone some advice or something like that, give someone a bit of a strategy for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. People aren't paying for the 1 hour of my time. They're paying for the 8 years that I have in the sector.
Right.
And also in, the areas that I am an expert in, which is now apparently art careers, podcasting, that sort of thing. I want to ask you, as executive director, what was the process like of stepping into that role? Did you need to assess the organization and think about a strategy beforehand for when you took the helm? I'm asking as someone who has no clue what that process is like, but I'm very curious to find out. And I think that the aspect of managing people and an organization with so many moving parts is definitely something not spoken about often enough in the arts sector. We were talking before we started this episode that there aren't that many degrees that show the practical side of working in the creative sector. And I would love to hear your perspective, especially as someone who now defines the vision of MacDowell in your position.
Yeah, I'm on my third or fourth go around as an executive director now, and I have learned a few things. I consider myself quite experienced in sort of how this goes at different size organizations and different sort of parts of the arts ecosystem. I have a lot of executive director colleagues who I talk to frequently. We connect and we share experiences and we sort of, support each other. And one thing we do sort of talk about is how the first year on the job, you are pretty much just figuring out where the paper is stored. What is the extension to call this person in that particular building? And there's a lot of that. There's so many details, and I call it forensics that you have to do in that first year of having a job like this. And it's not just sort of getting to know your staff, it's getting to know your whole ecosystems, your donor constituents. In my case, our thousands of active fellows and alumni who are part of this community. We're board managed. We've got a board of directors, and MacDowell happens to have a very large one. We've got 50 board members and, building relationships with them. So the first part of the job is really just getting immersed in this community and, getting to understand what makes its heartbeat and, what makes it tick. And then in terms of really assessing, what the organization needs, that part of the job comes into focus pretty quickly. If you spend the first couple of years, really thinking about where am I and what is this and what is the essence or what is the foundation or the core of this experience I'm in, it makes the next part of the job easier. And the next part of the job is, where do we go from here? What are the things I want to accomplish in my tenure as a leader here? And what are the ambitions I have for this organization? And sort of underlying all of that is the stewardship and caretaking. MacDowell is a legacy organization. It's a heritage organization. We haven't had that many leaders. I think I'm the 10th executive director in an organization that's 118 years old. So people at the top we stay in our jobs for a fairly long time. And all of that to say that there is a great responsibility that comes with this role. We've got over a century of history to steward and to take care of. And, maybe my main charge is making sure that this big MacDowell enterprise carries on long after, my tenure is done.
It's kind of going off script, but I do have a question for you, thinking about the past executive directors, you stepping into this role. what do you think are some maybe personality traits or even educational traits or experience that someone should have if they wanted to step into your role? Like if you were hypothetically having to pick someone to follow in your footsteps.
I'm going to answer this one as honestly as possible and say, and I think any executive director or someone who aspires to be an executive director listening to this will agree, maybe one of the most important things you need is a high pain threshold. These jobs...
I was not expecting that. Like looking me straight in the eye, a high pain threshold.
These jobs are not jobs for weak dispositions. And I say that, and just to be as frank as possible, we're running big enterprises, in some cases that are several decades old. We have a giant ecosystem and machinery to run. And you need to be able to understand that as fun and as rewarding as most parts of this job are, there's some really difficult days and there's some really difficult decisions. And sometimes you're not going to be the most popular person at your organization. But are you effective? And are you getting things done? And does your team support you in executing this joint mission that you're on? That's really how I look at the job. So yes, high pain threshold, and I hate to be so blunt about it, but also, this job really just needs someone with high emotional intelligence as well. It's very much a people job. You're talking to people all the time. If you're the kind of person that is not really interested in people and their stories and what makes them tick, this probably is not the career for you. I, describe myself as an introverted person, which I am. But I am also genuinely interested in getting to know people authentically and getting to know their stories. And that really, keeps me going in this job. Like, it really allows me to approach my job with a thoughtfulness and an intention and authenticity every day that I think helps, keep me sane and motivated and going on.
I was on Instagram scrolling through, as you do, and there's this Instagram account called Fuck Being Humble. And
I love that.
It's such a good account. And basically the gal who runs it, she wrote a book and she talks all about kind of stepping into your own when you're in your career. And part of it is, and something that you just said about sometimes you won't be the most liked person. That's something that I am coming to grips with now in my career. I think it is very difficult for me when I'm creating content, when I'm, having to deal with various moving parts and needing to make decisions, how to do that without being, or how to accept that sometimes someone might not like what I do, especially with putting content out there, be it, on social media, on the podcast, on other projects that I'm working on. And in terms of, okay, how am I going to do this? And I start to think about how it's going to be received, but not to the point where it's productive, to where I'm, creating content that I think will be helpful for the community. But instead it sometimes, locks me in and makes me feel like, I can't please everyone, but I'm trying so hard. And that just makes me almost paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that I definitely need to work on if I ever want to get to the point of being an executive director of an organization someday, because, and I'm aware of that now and I'm trying to work through that, Mm-hmm. But back to this account with Fuck Being Humble, she covers a lot of these themes and, says that you need to be proud of what you do and you also need to stand by your decisions and what you create. Yeah. But she also posted something about being an introvert and networking. And she said, it's such a stupid myth that introverts are not good at networking. And I'm an extrovert myself, mm-hmm. I can easily go up to someone in a room and I feel very comfortable and very, I talk. But at the same time, the point that she was making is introvert doesn't mean that you don't talk to people. Mm-hmm. That's not what that is. But it's also very much, it does cost you potentially more energy as an introvert to network. But at the same time, you might be developing more personal and deeper connections with the people that you speak to in comparison 100%. To an extrovert. Not to say that one is better than the other, but I think it's such a myth that introverts aren't people people.
It is such a myth. I am a huge people person, and I think there's been a lot written about in the last few years, certainly around introverted personality types and leadership. And it doesn't mean you can't be a great leader. I love leading. I love being in positions of leadership. There's a reason why I seek out sort of the chief executive role, and it's my place of comfort. And it works well with my personality type. And I think it's just as you say, it's because I connect to people in a really authentic way. I show up as myself in every job I'm in, A big part of this job is, networking and being out in the world and being the public face of, this incredible organization. And I love that part of my job because it feels very sort of authentically, organically even part of who I am. I never feel as though I'm putting on a facade or a face. I feel as though, I embody MacDowell. I aspire to embody it even more. And I'm just so fortunate and lucky to work with so many of my team members who also have that sort of same love and intention and care about this amazing organization. But I'd love to hear more about this podcast, Fuck Being Humble. Is it an Instagram account?
Yeah, Instagram account, podcast, and book.
I think we need more of that in this world.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember I don't know if you watched the Academy Awards. Timothée Chalamet had an acceptance speech when he won the Best Actor for his portrayal of Bob Dylan in A Complete Unknown. I just saw a snippet on this on social media afterwards, and he said something which I don't think people feel they have permission to say in public, which is, he said, "I am in pursuit of excellence." And it has become embarrassing to say you're pursuing excellence, but I look at the greats and I aspire to be the greats. And I was sort of like taken aback. I was like, wow, this, young person is so perceptive, and he is embracing that he has his Oscar in his hand, but he's still got so much ahead of him and he's pursuing greatness. And, when I worked in sort of the girls' gender justice field at my previous organization, I used to coach the adolescent young women I supported. Always take credit. If you're doing good things in the world and you're moving with good faith and a good heart, always take credit for those good things. It doesn't serve you or your community to be humble,
Yeah.
Aspire to greatness. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good. This is how progress is made in the world, whatever world you're in, whatever universe you operate in.
Yeah.
Progress is made by people who've aspired to a bigger vision for themselves and their community. And that's a conversation I have with my MacDowell team. It's a conversation I have with my child. And I think we should talk about that more.
I don't know when it became lame to try hard and to
exactly.
strive.
Why? It's cringe. It's cringe to make an effort.
No, why is it cringe? And I think, that's something that, again, thinking back to social media and presenting things and thinking about what will people think? But I was recently shortlisted for Forbes 30 Under 30, and I didn't make it on the list. It came out 2 days ago.
Oh.
And that was really hard for me. And I actually decided to post about it because I had content ready, thinking, hoping that I'd be on the list. And so I kind of just changed the content a bit and posted I was shortlisted. I was honored to be shortlisted. I'm happy for the people who have made it on the list. I have friends who were on the list, which, hey, they can recommend me next year. Fine, I'll give it a go. But I said, of course it's disappointing, but we move and it's okay. And I'm happy with even being shortlisted. But, thinking about the fact that I did admit that I didn't make it. And I think not enough people actually talk about that. And we always see these wins on social media. And nowadays, I think even if you use social media for your career, it gets to a point where it's such a comparison, FOMO environment where it can be quite unhealthy, I think. And that's one aspect of a generational situation with people, coming of age or, being in their early to late 20s, striving for a career and thinking that there's never going to be enough. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, and this reminds me of the Beyonce song with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's, her input.
Yeah, we can all be feminists.
We should all be fine. Yeah, that was
right.
from her TED Talk. And, her saying that, we should be striving for greatness, especially especially as women. And we should be taught to be striving for these things, which can create healthy competition. And that's okay too. And there's, a balance to be struck. But I think being authentic about these things, being honest about these things is incredibly important. But
also seeing something that, in a different mind frame you could have perceived as a failure as not a failure. Like this is part of your story, and the fact that you're sort of shortlisted for 30 under 30 means you've got a long arc to go in your story, and there's so much more, to be told. I have a friend, the Zimbabwean writer Patina Gapa, who this is years ago, once said something which is, when one dream dies, dream a bigger dream. And this is something only a very few people know, but before I accepted the MacDowell role to run this organization, I was turned down for what I thought was a dream job. And I was completely disappointed. Took months to sort of shift my mind back into success mode and, okay, what's next? And only to realize now in hindsight, that job would have been completely wrong for me. And the MacDowell job I'm doing now is completely right for me. So when one dream dies, dream a bigger dream, and sort of, see your life and see your professional life as a story, and not every part of the story is going to be like a highlight. It's life, there are lowlights too, and that's okay. Yeah.
It's not rejection, it's redirection, is what I like to tell myself. I'll just keep repeating it, and then eventually I'll believe it.
Eventually it'll be true.
So going back to your experience, your life experience, as well as your professional experience, you've lived on 3 continents, also having studied in London at LSE, which is what you said earlier on in the episode, but you've spent the majority of your career in New York. I would love to talk about if you feel that both your international experiences as well as your experiences in a metropolis such as New York City have impacted your approach to your work in the arts.
100%, yes. I mean, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and it was a very this is 1980s and 1990s Zimbabwe, post-colonial, Zimbabwe. I was actually born in Rhodesia, a colony. And in 1980, we became independent and formed, the republic. And it's, I was there until I was 18, and it's shaped me in ways that today, many years later, I am still processing, thinking about, grappling with. I was born in a big city. Harare, even at the time I was there, was a city of well over 1 million. I hear it's 2 or 3 million folks now. It's a big sprawl. It's an urban African city. It is both first world and developing world at the same time. There are parts of Harare you'll be in, and you could be anywhere in Manhattan, New York, and there are parts where you're just like, what is this place and what's happening in this country, So all of those things are true and flowing at the same time. And these things imprint on you, I was very fortunate to have parents who were strivers. They care very much about education, and I was privileged to have an excellent education. And that education allowed me to leave when I was 18, get a spot at the law school at the London School of Economics, and spend a few years in London, again getting this imprint, if you're a late adolescent and young adult, all of these experiences are forming you and building, your version of the world and how you want to be in the world. And then, honestly, moving to New York by accident. I was supposed to come for graduate school for 2 years and then, piss off and, be this great lawyer, somewhere, who knows where. And that just ended up not being the case. Here I am in New York, almost 25 years later, settled here. My child is American. My ex-husband is American, my son's father, my husband is American, my current husband. So I most certainly have roots here. And I just think that the career I have now and the sort of non-linear path I've taken just wouldn't have been possible anywhere else, I think. New York is a city where everything is possible. and it's singular. And I'm a person who's, been to most of the world's major cities. I'm lucky enough to be very, very well traveled, approaching 100 countries at this point.
Whoa.
And yes, I'm an avid traveler. That's something else that sort of, informs how I am in the world. But New York is singular, and the arts world in New York is singular. And I feel lucky to sort of have this very small corner of it. There's something about this mix of ideas, and very few cities in the world can say this. There are lots of big and amazing and impressive cities. London obviously is one of them, Paris, Johannesburg, Lagos. But there are fewer cities that can honestly say that the world comes to them. And in New York, you can experience the world within a few blocks. And it's extraordinary. And I feel just lucky to live here.
I think that because this is my first time in New York, because even though I'm American-Austrian, I was born in Seattle and my dad is in Seattle. So every time I come to the United States, I go to the West Coast. And I've never been to New York.
Welcome to New York.
I arrived 3 days ago, and this is...
What do you think?
I'm honestly falling in love with it.
Yes.
I wasn't expecting... I don't know what I was expecting. I knew that New York was always a place that I wanted to come. Mm-hmm. I always felt this sort of pull to New York. Maybe I thought because I'm American and it's a big city and there's a lot of art and, it's just generally an attractive city. But I love, it's hard to explain, but the vibe.
The vibe.
But boiling it down to even the little things, right? The fact that there's so much communication in the subway on where you're going. I was recently in Rome also conducting interviews for a project that I can't speak about publicly yet. Mm-hmm. And the public transport system was horrific.
Yeah.
It was horrific. You couldn't even see what the next stop was.
Yep.
So I was like, this is, Italy is a place that I can go for vacation, but I will never ever move to Italy and actually live and work in Italy because it's just not the life that I feel comfortable with, all the way down to the infrastructure of the public transportation systems.
Yes.
London is it's very similar to New York in the sense that there's a hustle and bustle and there's a lot of internationality and there's so many people and there's so many opportunities, right? You can really make a dream come true to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. But it's also incredibly old and cramped and dirty. And maybe I shouldn't say old and cramped and dirty. The city's historic and wonderful, but there's a certain level of... there's a certain level of discomfort and a lower quality of life that comes with a city of that proportion with, I guess, the age and with the, as I said, it has the oldest public transport system in the world. And that also comes with a certain level of dysfunction as much as it comes with its function. And even the sidewalks. It's all these little tiny things that make my life more overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Where in New York, you have this hustle and bustle, but you also somehow have the space and you somehow have the air to breathe. It's hard to explain.
So my question for you would be that feeling you have of the space and the air to breathe, is that a actual thing or is that your perception? Because the vibe in New York is one of you're surrounded by something that you need in your life and something that you're looking for. Maybe London has that for someone else. I love London. I lived there for a few years. It's interesting. One thing I will say, New York is different in this way than many other places I've lived or spent time in, is that it's the only place where I have, we were talking about this earlier in the episode, where I do not feel embarrassed to be a striver. I am an unashamed striver surrounded by other strivers, and this is the one place where it is okay to say that. And it's okay to claim that. And I meet personality types just like me we are ambitious and we want more, not just for ourselves. It's not about, it's about more than personal ambition. And I'm not talking about, money or any of those things. No, I'm talking about this need to make an impact, leave an imprint, build something, build community, build something that is greater. That's really what I'm talking about. And New York has that in droves.
Maybe I feel that.
Maybe that's what you're feeling.
Maybe that is what I'm feeling.
Maybe these are your people.
Well, I wasn't expecting my mom, she's known that I have been wanting to come to New York for a decade or longer. And she said, oh God, you're gonna love it there, and then you're gonna move there, and then it's gonna be harder for me to see you because she's in Austria. And so she was like, oh God, you're gonna move there, and then you're gonna be even further away.
I always say to folks that you need to live in a big city at least once in your life. And you live in London, but it sounds like New York is already...
It's calling me a little. I've been here for 3 days. I'm like, I love New York. I already accidentally shoulder checked someone on the sidewalk because it was a really busy street. That's very London, though. That's a very London thing as well. Like you just, it gets so busy, and then someone just like bumps into you, and you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe for the right job, I'll consider moving. But for now, I'm here for a whole month, so let's see how
explore, enjoy it. I love this town.
Yeah. My penultimate question for this episode is a bit of a, Latin question. And as we're sitting here today in New York City, in the USA, in 2025, it's quite a turbulent time politically. And I wanted to ask you about the letter from the director that you wrote in 2023. You wrote, and I quote, "The news, pick a subject, is so rife with examples of pain, cynicism, and the darkness of humanity that getting beyond this intersection might appear daunting, especially to our youth. Yet during periods of great turmoil, it's important to note that humans have, time and again, used art to try and interpret and understand and process the difficult times they have lived through and the times about to be faced. We can use art to knit communities back together from vastly different walks of life. This is what MacDowell has always done." Can we talk more about that? I mean, we've touched on, you wanting to make an impact. This is also part of it. We've touched on, MacDowell's mission, but I feel like right now it's particularly frightening.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what is happening in the world? We are in a very perilous time. We're in a perilous time as communities and as this arts community. I do lean on something, though, and I think about this quite a lot. I've mentioned, at several points during this episode that MacDowell is an organization that is 118 years old. And if you look on what's happened, here in the United States and internationally in the last century, 2 global pandemics, COVID and, the 1918 flu, right? This is all, MacDowell was founded in 1907, 2 world wars, many other wars in many parts of the world. We MacDowell invites fellows from all over the world, wars in regions that we're not even very familiar with. Here in the United States, the Jim Crow and the breakdown of segregation, Black Lives Matter movement. And these are just the things that are top of mind. And if you think about it, every time has been turbulent. Every time has been turbulent. That is sort of the cycle of humanity and the cycle of nature. I think we've had more perilous times than we've had times of peace and stability. And when I think about MacDowell, I think we're still here. It's 2025, from 1907, from when our founders first planted that seed on their acres, to where we are, we're still here. The country is still here. The world is still here, and we will go on. This is just the part of the story we're in and where we're in the cycle. And I really hold on to that, Am I leading this organization in this very confusing time for us all, in a way where we have survivability, and we see this as just the season we're in for now, and our true north is that thing we're in, which is the care and nurture and support of art and artists. And if I can answer that, whatever time we're in good times and bad, we're doing the right thing. Part of my job, and I think the most important part of my job, is convincing people who might not necessarily have a deep understanding of art, that art is life. Art, I've talked about community a lot, and community is everything. Art builds community. Art builds empathy. There is nothing that a creator or a creative person creates that doesn't touch someone else in some way or evoke some feeling, whatever that feeling is, right? It allows us to interpret our world and understand our world, and that is particularly important in uncertain times. When we're looking for reasons to hope and to understand that, tomorrow will come, and what it brings we don't know, but let's look forward, let's look ahead. Yeah, so all of that to say, the season will continue and there'll be a new season. For arts administrators, arts leaders, stay the course. And to use, the world's oldest cliche, we are in this together.
Yeah, I think, that was really not only inspiring, but also comforting in a way, because I think that sometimes reading the news, as I quoted from you, the news, pick a subject, is so rife with examples of pain. And I think that, I get the New York Times morning briefing in my inbox every morning, and sometimes I don't even open it because I'm like, I can't.
It's too much.
I can't. And sometimes I open it and and then I go throughout my day angry because I'm like, what are you doing?
Nothing like starting your day with a dose of rage in the morning.
But sometimes it's also good because I like to know what's going on. It is important to a certain extent, so I try to find a balance there. But I was speaking to Gareth Harris, who is a chief contributing editor at the Art newspaper, and he was on the podcast, just a recent episode last month. And we were talking about his book that's being released in July, August this year, called Towards an Ethical Art Museum. And he was basically also saying that, the book is being published, but he wasn't able to bring in any of what's happening now, obviously, because the book is now, going to print. They've had their final... Right. Draft and all of that. And so he's not bringing in any of what's happening with Trump, for example, at the moment, and how all of that is affecting the cultural sector. And so we were talking about it, and he just basically said, he would not want to be a museum director right now. And
I know a few museum directors, and... yeah, they are having the time of their lives.
Oof.
These are challenging jobs, but I think maybe there's one role right now worse than being a museum director, which is running a big university, a big American university. That's one job I would not want right now.
Hats off to Harvard, though.
Hats off to Harvard, but I think sort of the conversation remains the same. And, some of these institutions, Harvard is actually a good example of this. MacDowell certainly, maybe many other heritage organizations, I should call them legacy organizations, they'll be here after we're gone, There's no one who's at MacDowell in 2025 who was around in 1907, and the organization is still there, And that's sort of the long view I try and have in sort of in this role now, and certainly most of my professional roles.
It helps to zoom out, I think.
It helps to zoom out and have the long view. And, I think my core role, my job is just to be the good steward.
But going back to what you said about thinking about strategy, I think that might be also a personality trait that someone should have, the ability to be able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. As kitsch as that sounds, or as cliche as that sounds. Being able to do that is very, very important, to be able to do what you do.
Yeah, 100%.
So I have one final question to end the episode, and it's a fun question that I like to ask all of my guests. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. No, not this question.
I know, it's such a basic question.
This is the hard one.
It stumps everyone.
Art history, I don't know. Does literature count? Because at my core, I'm a novelist, and I think of things in terms of sort of narrative storytelling. Okay, I'm cheating and doing two. Shakespeare, because I was a very impressionable child being given the world's best sort of colonized education. And my headmaster, the sort of very elite private school I was at in Harare, Zimbabwe, was a Oxford Don who loved Shakespeare, and that imprinted on me. And I've never stopped loving Shakespeare. I still read his plays. I go to any production I can find wherever I am in the world. I'm just a fan. So there's that. But Doris Lessing, Doris Lessing, the great Zimbabwean / Rhodesian, I guess, British writer, who I was very fortunate to meet as a very young teen. She was visiting Harare as part of the Zimbabwe Women's Writers Workshop, and I did a workshop with her. My sister and I did it, and there was just a few people in the room. And at the time, you're just like, oh, the great Doris Lessing, and now I'm like, that was the world's most special experience. Complicated woman, but very interesting, and I think, sort of this thing which I strive for, she embodies, which is a life fully lived. Experience everything, go out there, do it all, talk to people, engage, don't close yourself off from the world. And, here we are talking about sort of the perilous times we are in the world. I think if more people engaged with each other in an authentic way, lived their lives fully, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have.
That concludes all of my questions. Chiwoniso, thank you so much for sitting down with me today for this episode of All About Art.
Thank you, Alexandra. This was great fun.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.